What up and welcome back to Mean Joe Video, where we celebrate the classics and lesser known gems. I'm Mean Joe Grizzly, your humble video store clerk and curator of the classics, and we are continuing our journey through the Friday the 13th franchise with an entry that promises a new beginning, which is Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. A New Beginning is the most divisive entry in the franchise, not only because it rehashes old concepts, but also for its impostor Jason. But it does have its defenders. The question is, am I one of them? Let's find out by dusting off that old VCR, popping in the tape, and checking out Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. Years after the events of Part 4, Tommy Jarvis is released from a mental institution to an isolated halfway home for troubled youth in order to be rehabilitated back into society. But as he struggles with his trauma and the reoccurring nightmares of the night of Jason's rampage, Tommy begins to question his sanity as he believes Jason has risen from the grave after bodies begin to pile up around him. So before we get into A New Beginning, I want to address some things about the last video. So just a few days before I was going to release this video, almost 1/3 of the footage that I had recorded was lost. I don't know how it got deleted, but somehow I lost the footage. So with the time crunch and everything, I had to pretty much put things together the best I could and release it. In hindsight, that wasn't the best move. I should have just re-recorded certain things and then released the video at a later date. But I didn't do that. So I was unfortunately not able to talk about the score of the movie that I do in almost every video in this series. And I also wasn't able to talk about the ending and its impact on the franchise moving forward. So while I'm giving my review on A New Beginning, I am going to be addressing the impact of the ending of the final chapter because it does retain to the path that A New Beginning should or did take. So again, I apologize. In the future, I'm going to handle this situation better and just delay the video because I personally would rather give the best that I can give you other than a halfway finished product. And the final chapter is my favorite entry in the franchise, and it was just very unfortunate that I didn't have as much to say about that one as I did the other entries I've covered in this franchise so far, because I truly love the final chapter. It is one of my favorite slasher movies of all time. So to give y'all what I consider a lackluster video was unacceptable, and I do apologize for that. So in the future, I will handle that better. So let's get to A New Beginning, and I will be integrating stuff about the impact of the ending of the final chapter as we go through this review. So after the success of the final chapter, the higher-ups at Paramount wanted to 100% continue the franchise because it was the low-risk take. You can literally take these incredibly low budgets and these incredibly low production value and get this high return. So it was the best business deal you could make. So Frank Mancuso Jr. would step into the more ceremonious role of executive producer so that he could make way for others to come in and take the franchise forward in a direction that they wanted to take it in. Enter producer Timothy Silver, who under the guidance of background producer Phil Scuderi would reach into the world of exploitation and pornography cinema. Yeah, you heard that right. Pornography cinema, and hire director Danny Steinman. The story will be written by returning writers Martin Kitrosser and Danny Cohen, and Danny Steinman would come in and also make his revisions to the script. The higher-ups really wanted to return to the roots of the franchise, mainly the first film because it was the most successful, and they wanted to take it back to the whodunit slasher formula. But they also wanted to maintain some kind of continuity and align things with the end of the final chapter. And the end of the final chapter left audiences with a very interesting possible path that this franchise could have taken. So at the end of the final chapter, after Tommy kills Jason, they end up at a hospital, and Trish is in the hospital bed being debriefed by the police and a physician that is there. And after everything is said and done, she asks the physician, is Tommy going to be okay? Because clearly Tommy isn't this murderous, crazy kid. He's a good-hearted, good kid. And for him to like lash out with so much violence, even to someone who was trying to kill his sister and had killed so many people around him, was very out of character. And Trish was just really, really worried that this was going to affect Tommy negatively for the rest of his life, maybe possibly have deep, deep psychological implications for his future. But the doctor said that Tommy would be perfectly fine, that it was 100% normal for him to lash out in such a situation because it was like a fight or flight situation where he had no choice but to protect himself and his sister, and that he will process that as time goes on. So they leave the room, and she asks to see Tommy, and Tommy comes in. Both of them give big hugs to each other and have this really emotional moment, and then the camera cuts to a view behind Trish where Tommy is hugging Trish, and Tommy's eyes open. He gives this really deep, disturbing stare into the camera as the frame freezes on his face staring into the camera, and then the movie ends, kind of indicating that Tommy is forever changed, and what could happen in the future is Tommy could take up the mantle of Jason, or at least kind of continue the campaign of carnage that Jason had already previously established. And that was something that, although I don't think it was something that was an original idea, that we had never seen that before at this point in slashers, but it was definitely something that was super interesting, and I believe that audiences wanted. Me personally, after hindsight of seeing what we got in the rest of this franchise, I thought it would have been a pretty big breath of fresh air, but at the same time, you simply can't beat the original. And I don't think that this franchise carries on as long as it does without Jason being at the focal point. But damn, it would have been super freaking interesting to see this happen. And this concept was very popular with the executives and was also very popular with cast members of the final chapter. Corey Feldman was completely on board with becoming the new face of the franchise and becoming the franchise's ultimate antagonist. Unfortunately, he wasn't available to do that because Richard Donner and Steven Spielberg stole him away to be in the 80s classic The Goonies. And I think we all can say that that was the better choice for him to take, because man, I could not imagine the Goonies without Corey Feldman. He is like a staple of that cast. And although I would have liked to have seen what happened with the franchise with Corey Feldman in that role, I would much rather have him in the Goonies instead. So without him being able to reprise his role as Tommy Jarvis in its entirety, where he can be a franchise character, he instead was given a cameo at the beginning of the film in a nightmare sequence, and it's pretty damn good. It gives the same vibes as the final chapter, where you have Tommy in a raincoat traversing the woods late at night for whatever reason. It's pouring down rain, and he stumbles across these two grave robbers that are literally digging up Jason Voorhees for whatever fucking reason they're doing it. And once they get him uncovered, he of course reanimates, kills both of the grave robbers, and then looks out towards Tommy and sees him in the bushes. He slowly makes his way there, and with Tommy looking up in terror and screaming, he comes down on Tommy with a machete, only for it to be revealed to be a nightmare sequence, and a older Tommy Jarvis, now casted by John Shepherd, to awaken from this nightmare and let us know that some time has passed since the events of the final chapter. And now Tommy is out of the mental institution, and he is heading into being rehabilitated in society at this halfway house. And this nightmare scene was shot at Corey Feldman's family home. They brought a rain machine in, and they shot it, I believe, in like a few hours. And it's pretty impressive considering that they did it in someone's backyard. So back to the development of A New Beginning, they began casting. They casted John Shepherd as a older Tommy Jarvis, and then with the rest of the cast, once they were built, they all were under the impression that they were just going to be in a horror film called Repetition, and had no idea that it was going to be the new Friday the 13th. And then they were taken to the set, and then they realized that they were on the brand new Friday the 13th film. And some of that garnered a lot of excitement, and some of it did not. They hired Martin Becker and his crew to do the special effects and the practical effects makeup. And as far as the stuntman goes, they hired Dick Warlock, legendary Michael Myers actor Dick Warlock, to be the stunt coordinator. And I thought that was such a cool fact because Dick Warlock is my favorite Michael Myers. I know that's a hot take. I don't care. I think he is the scariest version of Michael Myers that we have ever gotten, and that he embodied that character and kind of set the template for that character in the rest of the franchise moving forward. So it was really cool to see that he not only had his hands in the Halloween franchise, but also in the Friday the 13th franchise. And of course, Harry Manfredini would return to bring us a yet another unique and revised version of that original score that he has been building on since 1980. So with the script written, the cast and crew gathered, and armed with a budget of $2.2 million, filming would begin in September of 1984. Just months after the release of Friday the 13th, the final chapter. And oddly enough, filming would wrap 1 month later. So after the amazing cast that Joseph Zito and crew had assembled in the final chapter, to say that they were going to have a hard time measuring up to that is an understatement. And even rivaling that was damn near impossible. And I can tell you right now that A New Beginning 100% does not measure up whatsoever. But there are some standouts. You have John Shepherd as the recasted Tommy Jarvis, an older version of Tommy Jarvis, probably in his late teens, maybe early 20s. And he is quite convincing as someone who has just experienced this unrelenting trauma that has greatly affected his life in every aspect. And usually when they recast a character, they really do have a hard time trying to replicate the personality of that individual. And I think that they did a good job of giving us enough to know that, yeah, this is still Tommy. He's just deeply disturbed. And they do this in the way of like having him still have his mask and his little gadgets that he makes and stuff, and how he still has this affinity for his stuff, that he doesn't want his stuff to be messed with, but he wants to show people. Even though he has been changed by all this trauma in his life, he still wants to be that person. And you could see that inner struggle with him when he doesn't want to be in any kind of social situation. He just wants to be left alone. He doesn't want to interact with anyone. But when he gets a chance to interact with the character of Reggie, he immediately starts showing him all his stuff, even though he is super protective of it and he doesn't want anyone to touch it. And even though I think that he does a good job of playing this person who has this immense trauma in their life, it is kind of disappointing that they don't give him more like dialogue. They don't give him more to say. They pretty much make him a mute throughout the whole movie. They kind of handle him very similar to how the Halloween franchise handled Danielle Harris's character of Jamie Lloyd, making him a mute in the next sequel. And I'm not a fan of that. I don't think that it helps the character out at all. Yes, I understand the character has had trauma, but to make them have literally maybe 2 lines of dialogue is, to me, detrimental to the character. Now, again, John Shepherd does a good job of non-verbal acting, but at the same time, it makes the character very one-dimensional, because we're looking for that emotional connection that we had with Tommy in the final chapter, and it's just not here. We don't really feel sorry for Tommy in this movie after the events of his mother being killed and him being separated from his sister Trish. We get no explanation on what happens to Trish, but without those emotional connections, we don't know anything about this older version of Tommy other than he's just super fucked up from that night. Again, I think that his performance is decent considering he has hardly any dialogue. You have Shavar Ross as Reckless Reggie. He is the lightheartedness factor of this movie, as well as the tension factor of this movie, because you are so worried about his well-being when shit starts popping off. It's a character for the audiences to sit back on the edge of your seat because you don't want anything to happen to the kid. But he's more character than that. He's like the quintessential good kid who, just like with Tommy, is thrown into this wild and murderous situation, and he is just trying to survive. And when he has moments where he has to step up and defend himself and defend people that he cares about, he comes through, and I believe that his performance is very convincing. And he quite possibly has the best scream of the movie, and I know that sounds crazy, but the screams in this movie by some of the female cast they're good, they're quintessential slasher screams, but Reckless Reggie's got some pipes on him, man. He screams just like a girl, and I don't think that is to his detriment, because he is that prepubescent teen, if you will, and he would kind of have a scream like this, and I thought that was real authentic and quite frankly hilarious. When you first hear it, it's funny as shit. You have Melanie Kinnaman as Pam, the final girl of the movie and mother figure to all of the kids in this halfway house. She is the love interest slash maybe girlfriend but co-worker of the guy who runs the halfway house, but she is like the second in command, and everybody looks up to her, like I said, as a mother figure or as a role model. And when she is thrown into this situation, she at times exhibits some of the good factors of the really good final girls of this franchise, but most of the time she is the helpless victim. She has a moment where she gets after the impostor Jason with a chainsaw, but most of the time she is just running for her life, and at one point she was dead to rights and she was going to die because she was just she fell like the typical slasher trope is. She just looked on in terror as this imposter Jason was about to hack her to pieces, and if it wouldn't have been for Reckless Reggie, she'd be dead. She wouldn't be the final girl. So I do think that she is a downgrade compared to the really good final girls in this movie, but she's serviceable, and I don't dislike her character. And I think that has a lot to do because she doesn't make really, really dumb decisions like a lot of final girls do. She actually does make smart decisions. Just at the moment where she fell, she just completely gave up and was accepting her fate of being hacked to death. And that's something that I don't want my final girls to have. I want them to fight like hell the entire time they are being pursued in any situation. So she is a slight downgrade from the other final girls in this franchise, but definitely not the worst. You have Carol Locktail that plays Ethel, and Ethel is this white trash redneck lady with a special needs son that's older. He's a grown man child is the best way that I can describe it. And she is hilarious. Every time she is on the screen, her little zingers that she throws, even if they're not like clever, it's just how she fires them off and how hateful she is with them is funny as shit. There's like one scene in the movie where this drifter shows up and she's completely surprised by him being at the door. And it's funny as hell because she opens up the door and he's standing there and she's like, "Oh God, who the fuck are you?" And it's hilarious. Like the way that her and her son's camaraderie is, where she's just this beaten down older lady who's just pissed off at the world and lonely, and just all she has is her special needs grown ass man son who is just someone who cannot take care of himself whatsoever, and she is just absolutely beaten down by this fact. And although that is a real world thing, she is hilarious in the way that she handles it, because she handles it being the biggest bitch in the world, and she is hilarious. And her conflict comes with the halfway house because she wants everybody off of her property. She's the get off my property type person. And these kids from this halfway house, particularly a couple that sneak off all the time to have sex in the woods and smoke pot, they consistently go on her property, and she has had it. So she's like, "I'm going to shoot the next one that comes in," and all this stuff. So you're introduced to her early in the movie, and every time she's on the screen, she's funny as shit. And she's one of my favorite characters of this movie. Then you have Miguel Nunez as Demon, who is Reggie the Reckless's older brother, who comes into town to visit Reggie, and Pam takes Reggie and Tommy with her over to meet with him. And after they leave, you have the most infamous scene probably of the entire franchise. This is right up there with the Crispin Glover dance scene where Demon ate too many enchiladas, and he has to run off to the outhouse, and he goes in, and then he goes and starts pooping, and his girlfriend comes up shaking the outhouse, playing with him and everything, and then they break out into this very strange, very awkward, very cringy little duet where they're singing, and it's freaking hilarious. It's them like, ooh, baby, and they just going, hey, baby, ooh, baby, back and forth to each other. And it is funny as shit. And it's one of the most famous scenes in this entire franchise. Definitely an unforgettable part of the franchise. And Miguel Nunez is no stranger to horror either, so it's always good to see him in these movies. But the question was, as far as the cast goes, is who was going to play the killer? Who was going to play Jason? How are they going to bring Jason back or not bring him back? And to me, this is probably the most divisive part of this movie, was the choice to have an impostor Jason. This is the one thing that the hate is definitely hurled at when it comes to this movie, is the impostor Jason, because everyone was expecting Tommy Jarvis to be the killer in this movie, and it would have made perfect sense. It would have been predictable, but it would have made total sense for Tommy to be the killer and to take up the hockey mask and be the new Jason. But instead, we're given Roy Burns, played by Dick Weiland, who is the ambulance driver, who makes his appearance very early in the movie because a kid is killed by another kid at this halfway house. And it turns out that that kid is Roy Burns' illegitimate child. So Roy Burns goes insane, and he goes on a murderous rampage, and he uses the moniker of Jason as his scapegoat. He wanted everyone to believe that Jason was alive and had risen from the grave and was going around killing people again. And none of that is outright explained. It is what is given to us in an exposition dump at the end of the film by the sheriff when he is kind of talking to Pam after the aftermath of everything, where they found newspaper clippings of Jason Voorhees on the body of Roy Burns. And although I don't find it to be this super egregious crime that this happened, it just felt like rehashing things. And I know that that's what the studio executives wanted to do. They wanted that whodunit, and the first Friday the 13th is a whodunit, but it's barely a whodunit because you are never introduced to Pamela Voorhees in that movie until the end when she is revealed. So it wasn't this big aha moment like a lot of whodunits were. So I will give it credit where credit's due, is that it was an aha moment when he was revealed to be the killer, but it was just like, oh, it's that guy. Because we thought that it was going to be Tommy, and it would have been cool if it had been Tommy, but it's not Tommy. So there, and I will talk about that later on in this review. But what starts all this off is Roy Burns' son, who he has had nothing to do with. It is his illegitimate child who has been at this halfway house, and his name is Joey. And he is played by Dominic Bercia. And Joey is the chocolate bar eating, chubby, kind of slow, not really, maybe autistic kid who is definitely the odd man out at this halfway house, even though you don't really get a lot of backstory on him or nothing. And he's going around trying to help people with chores, and he goes over to two of the other girls, and they're doing laundry, and he just obnoxiously picks up this laundry with chocolate all over his fingers and gets them all dirty and ruins them. And then he moves on and goes over to Vic. And Vic is this big, not necessarily muscular, but just this big opposing dude who clearly is 100% a psychopath. And he is there chopping wood. He's actually chopping into this big, humongous piece of wood that looks like the entire bottom stump of a tree, and it seems like it's petrified too, because he's sitting there chopping in this same spot, and it looks like he's been chopping it for an hour, and he's laying pieces up there, kind of using it as a chopping block as well. But when you're watching him chop wood, you can tell he's not chopping wood because he likes to chop wood. He's chopping wood because he's emulating killing people, because Vic is a psycho. He is 100% a psycho. And unfortunately for Joey, going up to Vic and offering him a chocolate bar and then getting pissed when Vic chops the chocolate bar in half with the axe ends up being the death of Joey, because he buries that axe into Joey's back and hacks him to pieces. And that one event, when the ambulance responds to the scene to get the body, that's when Roy Burns realizes it's his illegitimate son that he apparently has been watching from afar. And yeah, it's a bit hand-wavy and it works, but it's really hard to believe that Roy Burns would go on this big murderous rampage over a son that he had zero connections with. He seemingly had so little connection to Joey that no one knew that they were father and son. Usually in small towns like that, you get the dirt on that very quickly. Like the whole town's in on it but the people who have the dirt on them. So it just didn't seem like it was very believable, but it works. And this is particularly disappointing, just like I said before, because all the elements for Tommy to be the next Jason was there. It was telegraphed there, and they just didn't go through with it. So when the impostor Jason is revealed at the end of the movie, he is played by stuntman Tom Morga, under the guidance of Dick Warlock. And I've already expressed how much I like Dick Warlock. But he comes in, and Tom Morga plays Jason in almost the entire final act and most of the nightmare sequences. There's just a few scenes here and there where he is relieved by stunt actor John Hook. So it doesn't really say why John Hook was in there for a few scenes, but Morgan gets the credit because he was there the majority of the time doing all this work. And I think he does a good job of emulating Jason. And I even like the little touch of, okay, this is Jason. Like the actors think that, or the characters think that this is Jason risen from the grave. And other than when he really does get hurt, like when Reggie hits him with the tractor and stuff like that, he does a good job of pursuing his victims relentlessly, just like Jason would. And I do think the little parts where he does get hurt, I think that does separate him a little bit from the other Jasons and makes it believable, and yet gives the audience a little wink saying, yeah, he looks like Jason, but he's not really Jason. But I think the most unique thing about this imposter Jason is his mask. His mask, instead of having the red triangles here and on the forehead, he has two blue triangles right here below the mouthpiece, or where the mouth should be. And I like that little subtle change. I do think it's cool, and it separates it from all the other masks that we get in this franchise. And I know that a lot of people think it's just blah, but I kind of like the blue triangles a little bit. And I can see that if I was an audience member in 1985 and I was seeing this movie and not knowing what direction they were going in, he would be fairly convincing as Jason being resurrected from the grave, other than the fact that he's not all decayed and all beat up like he was in the other movies. And if that wasn't a dead giveaway and the mask wasn't this dead giveaway, then when he dies and he falls out of the barn door and lands on this piece of farming equipment that looks like spikes and a mask flies off, you see that it is Roy Burns. And I could see that being convincing up until that point a little bit. And I can also see why people hated it. I would be very disappointed if I went to this movie and when you sit there and you think that it's Jason, and you, at the moment, in the heat of the moment, you're probably not wondering, well, why is he all like not scarred up and everything like he was in the other movies? Why is he not decayed? He's been dead for a while. And then when you get the reveal, you're like, oh shit, really? So I could see why people didn't like it when it's revealed to be Roy Burns. When everything's all said and done, and after the exposition dumped by the sheriff, Pam goes over to check on Tommy in his room, and she opens up the door and goes up to his bed, and Tommy is seemingly laying there unconscious. And out of nowhere, Tommy throws back the covers and has a big ass knife under it. He stabs Pam in the stomach and laughs maniacally while he's stabbing Pam to death. And then it's revealed that that is this movie's dream sequence, because it cuts back to Tommy waking up from this nightmare, and the hallucination of true Jason is in front of him. And you see Tommy staring at the Jason with this intense fear that out of nowhere kind of becomes a look of relief, or a look of normalcy is the best way I can describe it, as that apparition of Jason fades out. Tommy then proceeds to get out of the bed, head over to the nightstand, open the drawer, and inside the drawer is the impostor Jason mask, which makes absolutely no fucking sense. But he takes the mask out, he looks in it, stares at it, and right before he can do anything else, he hears Pam coming into the room. And then it cuts back to Pam, and she's going to check on Tommy. She hears a loud crash in the room. She enters the room. The window's broken. Tommy is nowhere to be found. And behind her in the doorway, the door slowly closes, and it is revealed that Tommy has donned the Roy Burns mask and has a knife and looks like he's about to stab Pam to death when the movie fades to black and the movie ends. I feel like that ending had so much potential if they fucking went somewhere with it, because they didn't. Again, going back to another franchise that did this later, there's a lot of parallels between how the Halloween franchise handled Danielle Harris's character of Jamie Lloyd and how Paramount handled the character of Tommy Jarvis in this, where it is set up that they are going to be the killer, and then that idea is completely abandoned in the sequel, and it's never mentioned again. It's not something that is told in exposition after. It just never gets mentioned again in this franchise, whereas in Halloween it just writes it off as Jamie had a brief moment of psychosis. And I could see at the time where that'd be cool, how you'd be like, oh, they are doing the storyline, and then only for it to not happen in the sequel. But it is what it is. It is just a missed opportunity. And we once again had the return of Harry Manfredini, bringing us another great variation of that original Friday the 13th score. And this time he adds a little bit more strings into it, and there is one reoccurring line of music that he does where the string section is giving this slowly building or highly building, like crescendoing string part, where it's like pursuit music is the best way I can put it. Like you're running from your pursuer. And I think that little note or that little line of music is really, really good. And I think that the other little variations that he does is good as well. Just the one issue that I have with this one is that little pursuit part in the score is used in some awkward times. And one time in particular where it was very awkward was the scene where Reggie, Pam, and Tommy are going to see Reggie's brother Demon at the trailer park. And all they're doing is driving down the road, and this scene, this part of this music comes on, and it's like, what the fuck's about to happen? And it's just them driving from the halfway house to the trailer park very slowly, and it just doesn't make sense to have that part of the score in there. Don't know why that happened. That's kind of out of character for Harry Manfredini. It's not anything that's detrimental. It's just something that I really, really noticed. The shocking and jarring high notes that hits in this franchise when people are getting killed seem to be heightened even more in this one. They seem to be more pronounced. And also the music that plays in the dream sequences is really eerie and really sets this atmosphere. And I think that those are freaking awesome as well. The title sequence is once again a banger, where we have the strings in the score reaching this slowly building crescendo, where you have the Friday the 13th symbol in this weird, like, negative color format fading into the white logo, and then out of nowhere the impostor Jason mask comes into the screen, hits the logo explodes, and then the words "A New Beginning" come across the screen. As the camera zooms in on the mask turns around, and then you have the camera go through the eye hole part of the mask into the opening credits. I thought it was fucking cool. Most of the opening credit scenes, or the opening title card scenes, are awesome in these movies, and this is no exception. This one's another banger. So just like I was saying before, Danny Steinman is a exploitation filmmaker and porno director, and there are scenes in this movie, a lot of scenes in this movie actually, where he shoots this like a porno. And like, it's also rumored that the way when he was in on the casting, the way that he was helping cast people was based on how the girls looked and how their body was. And that's creepy. And that creepy style does transfer over into his directing style, because every time there is TNA on the screen, which this movie has probably the most TNA out of the entire franchise, and when there are people like having a sex scene, or there are parts where girls show their boobs or whatever, the camera really lingers on it, and it just makes everything feel a little sleazy. And I'm not going to sit here and judge this movie for its TNA content, because that's a staple of the slasher genre, is blood, guts, and TNA. That's just how it is. That's how the slasher genre made its bread and butter. And I'm not going to judge this movie too harsh on it, but there is something really super sleazy about how this movie's shot, and it's one of the more common criticisms that this movie is shot like a porno. And allegedly it really looked like a porno, because there was apparently some very, very super explicit sex scenes in this movie that the MPAA made them cut. And that's kind of crazy, because the MPAA really didn't care too much about sexuality and sex stuff as much as you would think they would in this movie. They were more concerned with the violence on screen, and they were able to keep some explicit shots of nudity and stuff in this movie as long as they cut certain kills out. And I found that to be pretty interesting too. Who doesn't like TNA? But I do care a lot about the characters too, and when you focus more on them just being another naked teenager to get slashed to death, you're making the criticisms of all these critics that have been shit on this franchise forever, you're giving them ammo. Quite simple. So I think it's safe to say without a doubt this is the sleaziest chapter in the Friday the 13th franchise. As far as the kills go here, Martin Becker and the Special Effects team, they were like the first true victims of the MPAA really cracking down on violence and gore in movies. And unfortunately for A New Beginning, this is like the first movie that you can noticeably see that the MPAA is starting to get this franchise under their thumb as far as like censoring the kills and stuff, because Martin Becker and his team allegedly had some really good, really wild kills in this movie, and some of them I think did need to be cut, but there are some that could have been great all-timers on this, and the MPAA wanted it cut out. And that is something that starts to plague this franchise from this movie forward. And this leads to a lot of the kills being reduced to cutaway kills, off-screen kills, a lot of stabby kills instead of any kind of uniqueness to them. And they just ended up on the cut room floor. And one in particular that ended up in the cut room floor was the death of Violet, the new wave / alt girl of the group. And she's up in the room, she's jamming out the pseudo echo, she's doing her little robot dance, which is a kick-ass robot dance. She nails the robot. And Jason comes up into her room, pins her up on a wall, stabs her in the stomach. And that's not her original death. Her original death was a lot more explicit than that. It's probably a good thing that it got cut, because it would have been something on the level of Terrifier if it would have gotten in this movie, where Violet is held up on the wall and then Jason actually takes the knife and stabs her in the crotch all the way up. And I can see why they wanted that one cut, because in 1985 they were not ready for something that violent. But even though these kills were toned down, there's still some standouts that made it into the movie. You got a double kill that kind of happens here towards the beginning of the movie. It's like two of the first victims, where the this couple have just got done having sex. Their names are escaping me at this moment. And the one girl is laying naked on the ground while the dude goes off and pisses or whatever. And the garden shears come in and stabs in her eyes. They don't show it stab. It's off screen, but it's the hands with the shears and then the cut. You hear it crunch through the bone right there in the nose between the eyes. And then the aftermath of that was really gnarly. Then the second kill comes when the dude comes back. He sees the body of his girl. He backs up and he ends up putting his back on this tree, and a leather strap gets thrown around the tree, around his area where his eyes are. And then a stick is placed between two metal rings that are attached to this strap, and the killer begins twisting the stick, tightening up this strap until it crushes his head. And the head crush is off screen, but just the fact that happened, it kind of shows it starting to indent in his skull, but it's the fact that you could hear it and that the strap breaks and you hear the guy go lifeless and you hear the crunch of his skull. It was freaking gnarly. Then you had the road flare kill where these two greasers, which is really weird to see greasers out in the 80s like that. It's kind of strange because I don't really think you had greasers back then. That's more of like a 50s, 60s type thing. But I digress. They broke down the side of the road. One of them goes off to poop in the woods. Yet another example of people going in the woods or either taking a dump without wiping. So there's that. And the one guy that stays behind that's working on the car, someone comes up behind him, which turns out to be the killer, pops a road flare, and he turns around, looks. He thinks it's his friend messing around with him, so he approaches him, and the killer sticks the road flare in his mouth. And it was freaking awesome. It was a good prop head where the road flare goes in and just gets moved around in his mouth. Just absolutely fucking cool. Then you got probably the funniest death in the movie, and it's also pretty gnarly too, even though there's hardly any blood with it, where the man baby son of Ethel just got his ass kicked by Tommy Jarvis. So he's on his dirt bike and he's just going around the house in circles screaming, "Ah, he hurt me, mama. He hurt me bad, mama," because Tommy whooped his ass. He's going around the house, "Ah, he hurt me, mama. He hurt me." And he keeps going around the house. Eventually the killer is hiding behind a tree and you see the big, huge meat cleaver or axe, some kind of chopping instrument, come out from around the tree and cut his head clean off. And all you see is the prop head hit the ground. And that was freaking cool. It didn't have hardly any blood in it, but it was pretty damn cool. So even though the MPA didn't get a hold of this when it comes to the kills, there's still some pretty solid ones here. And I think that they're definitely not the tamest in the franchise. But again, you can tell that this is where the MPA censorship started in this franchise. But ultimately, A New Beginning is the one entry in the franchise that you can label the most missed opportunities, in my opinion. I do think that they made good choices as far as making this a whodunit. I just don't think they made the right choice of who the killer was going to be. I think that they should have leaned really hard in on Tommy Jarvis being the killer, and they could have had the reveal at the end that he was the killer by pretty much just keeping the hospital dream sequence intact and making that the final scene or one of the final scenes in the movie before Tommy is ultimately dispatched by the police or goes off for the sequel. And obviously we know that idea was abandoned, but I would have much rather them go hard into that and give us something unique than give us something that was kind of random and predictable at the same time, like the first movie's whodunit aspect was. And what's also odd is that other franchises would do the same thing and get similar results, and it's like, y'all didn't learn from what this other franchise did. It's kind of crazy because Compass International did it with Halloween. I've mentioned this a few times before. What they did with Jamie Lloyd, and fans fucking hated it. Fans wanted Jamie Lloyd to become the killer of that franchise for a long time. And again, I don't think the franchise works without Michael, just like I don't think Friday the 13th works without Jason. But it would have been kind of cool to see a little 3-movie arc of these two characters doing that in their respective franchises, and studios just didn't have the balls to do it. And probably two of the most missed opportunities, in my opinion, would have been not killing Joey or having Joey die by some other means, and then having impostor Jason versus Vic. That would have been badass. I really wanted to see a toe-to-toe fight with two psychos, and that would have been so fucking cool to see Vic with an axe face off against imposter Michael with the machete. That'd have been so fucking cool, and that's a very big missed opportunity. But I think the biggest missed opportunity that this movie has is after it established that it was going in the path of making Roy Burns the imposter Jason, they show Tommy throughout this movie as being someone who can fight like hell. He's got some kind of self-defense training, some kind of martial arts training, and he kicks one character's ass and he beats the shit out of another character in this movie. And you're like, the whole time you're like, all right, if Jason is back and he attacks Tommy, or whoever this killer is attacks Tommy, he's going to fuck them up. And that doesn't happen. Instead, Tommy chokes when he finally comes face to face with the imposter Jason. And it was so fucking disappointing because I would have loved to have watched Tommy kung fuing the shit out of Jason at the end of this movie. Or kung fuing the shit out of imposter Jason at the end of this movie. If they weren't going to go the route of making Tommy the killer, that was like the perfect thing that they could have done, in my opinion. And they didn't fucking do it. Oh, what the franchise could have been if they would have just used a little bit of creativity. So A New Beginning released in March 22nd, 1985, and with a $2.2 million budget, it had a pretty damn big opening weekend. But attendance declined slowly and slowly after each week, after obviously details of the reveal and everything got out that it wasn't Jason. No doubt that affected the steady decline from week to week. And as it exited its theatrical run, it grossed $21.9 million, almost $22 million off of a $2.2 million budget. So that's a financial success. But this will begin a slow box office spiral that the franchise would go on from this movie from here out, because after this, the returns started diminishing with each entry. And shocker, critics absolutely hated this film. They trashed it for its sleazy camera work, the explicit nudity, the violence, and of course the predictability. And I think that those are fair criticisms. But I kind of like this entry in the franchise. I do not share the same opinion that this is the worst entry in the franchise. I find this entry to be very rewatchable, and I find the kills to be really good as well. And I don't mind the imposter Jason so much as if I don't think about the missed opportunities they could have had with it. And I like the mask. I think the mask is cool. Is it my favorite? Absolutely not. Is it one of my favorites? Nah, but it's damn sure not last. And as of right now, until I finish going through this franchise once again, it's somewhere in the middle for me. So with all that being said, I'm giving Friday the 13th A New Beginning a 3.5 out of 5. So before you leave, make sure you pick up your copy of Friday the 13th A New Beginning. And if you like this video, like it. And if you like it enough, please head over to the channel, hit the subscribe and bell buttons so you never miss a new release. Also follow me on all social media platforms so you can get channel updates, movie news, and all forms of badassery. Coming up next is a fan favorite in the franchise and definitely one of mine, and that is Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. And this is the official resurrection of Jason Voorhees, where Jason officially becomes the super zombie that we know him as today. So until next time, remember, be kind, rewind.